Yu Minjae's eyes never left the glowing monitor as he rewound the file for the fourth time. The digital clock in the corner of the screen pulsed. 3:01 a.m. Inside the soundproof darkness of his private security hub, the air felt heavy, charged with a betrayal he had anticipated for weeks. There she was, Saad Adeyemi, the woman he had brought into his home to care for his fragile mother, Mrs. Seo Yun-ok. In the high-contrast grain of the security feed, Saada's silhouette moved with a quiet, ghost-like precision toward the heavy oak doors of the matriarch's suite. Minjae's jaw tightened. Every instinct that had allowed him to survive the cutthroat world of the Korean underground told him this was the moment the mask fell. The whispers from his associates had been relentless. The missing family heirlooms, Saada's unexplained midnight absences, the desperate calls back to her family. To Minjae, the conclusion was inescapable. Saad was a predator using his mother's fading mind to dismantle his legacy from the inside. He leaned closer to the screen, the blue light reflecting off his sharp, disciplined features. This was the evidence he needed to purge the outsider from his sanctuary. His thumb hovered over the command button that would alert his tactical team. In his world, a single signal could make a person like Saad vanish. Not a victim of violence, but systematically erased, stripped of her identity and cast out of Seoul forever. But just as he prepared to give the order, the camera inside his mother's bedroom flared to life. Mrs. Seo Yun-ok stood in the center of the room, her traditional silk robes trembling as tears carved paths through her gentle features. Lost in a fog of confusion, she was crying out for a husband long since buried, a small, fragile figure drowning in the silence of her own home. 6 weeks before the cameras recorded that fateful midnight encounter, Saad Adeyemi stood at the towering iron gates of the Kim estate, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle of a worn suitcase. The Seoul humidity clung to her skin, a heavy reminder of how far she had traveled from the familiar heat of Lagos. In her purse lay a crumpled medical invoice for her father's treatment back home, a figure so large it felt like a death sentence. She had taken this job because the salary was an impossibility, a sum that promised to buy her father time, provided she could survive the people paying it. The gates opened with a low, industrial hiss, revealing a driveway lined with immaculately manicured gardens that felt devoid of life. There were no birds, no gardeners, only the oppressive silence of a fortress. As the black sedan came to a halt at the main entrance, a man stepped out of the shadows. Yu Minjae didn't just occupy space, he dominated it. He was dressed in a three-piece suit that looked more like armor, his posture reflecting a life defined by discipline and the heavy burden of authority. Saad felt his gaze move over her, a cold, clinical assessment that seemed to strip away her professional mask. His jawline was sharp, his eyes dark and devoid of the warmth she was used to seeing in the families she had served. "Miss Adeyemi," he said, his voice a low, controlled resonance that commanded immediate attention. He didn't offer a hand or a welcome. He simply stood there, a wall of glass and steel. "I am here to care for your mother, Mr. Yu," Saad said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "I have my nursing credentials and years of experience in memory care." Minjae moved a step closer, and the temperature in the foyer seemed to drop. "Credentials mean very little in this house," he countered, his eyes boring into hers. "Results are the only currency I recognize. My mother is the only piece of my soul I have left. You will anticipate her needs before she speaks them. You will treat her with absolute dignity." He paused, his expression hardening into something predatory. "But understand this. If I find you are here for any reason other than her well-being, the consequences will be something you cannot imagine." The threat was not subtle. It hung in the air like a blade. Saad looked at this man, this Korean Mafia boss the agency had whispered about, and saw not just a monster, but a son whose love had been twisted into a weapon of suspicion. She didn't flinch. "My only agenda is your mother's comfort, sir," she replied softly. Something flickered in Minjae's intense eyes, a brief flash of shock that she had met his gaze without trembling. He turned abruptly, his heels clicking against the marble floor as he signaled for his sister to show Saad to the mother's wing. As Saad followed, she looked back once to see Min-jae watching her from the shadows of the hall. His silhouette a lonely, rigid figure in a house built on secrets and stone. The atmosphere within the Kim mansion shifted from cold to suffocating 3 days after Sada's arrival. It happened during the morning tea service. A moment of fragile peace shattered when Min-jae discovered the velvet-lined display case in the library was empty. The eternal crane, a platinum brooch encrusted with rare blue diamonds and a centerpiece of the family's heritage, had vanished. To Min-jae, this wasn't just a loss of wealth. It was a breach of his sanctuary, an insult to the absolute control he demanded over his domain. His lead security associate, a man whose scars told stories of brutal loyalty, didn't hesitate to voice what the rest of the staff was already whispering. The girl was seen near the library after midnight, he reported, his voice low and pointed. She's desperate, sir. Our reports show her father's hospital bills in Lagos have tripled this month. Desperation is a dangerous motivation for an outsider. The implication hung in the air, fueling the fires of Min-jae's inherent paranoia. Min-jae stood by the window, his reflection in the glass as sharp as a blade. He thought of Sada's expressive, fearful eyes and the way she had held his gaze in the foyer, a display of dignity he had initially mistaken for innocence. Now that same memory felt like a taunt. Had she played him? Was the kind caregiver just a mask for a professional thief who knew exactly which heartstrings to pull? He summoned Saad to the study. She stood before him, her hands clasped tightly, her posture reflecting a mix of shock and a quiet, defensive strength. Something is missing, Miss Adeyemi, he began, his voice dropping to a dangerous, silky whisper. A piece of my mother's history. A piece of me. I haven't taken anything, Mr. Yu, Saad replied, her voice trembling but her eyes remaining fixed on his. I am here to work, not to steal. If you suspect me, search my room. Search everything I own. Oh, I intend to do much more than search your room, Min-jae countered, leaning across the desk until he could see the pulse jumping in her neck. He didn't tell her that he had already authorized a team of technicians to transform the mother's wing into a digital panopticon. By the time the sun set, every corner of Sada's existence, the way she breathed in her sleep, the hushed prayers she offered in the dark, and her most private interactions with his mother, would be captured in high definition. He watched her walk away, her silhouette framed by the heavy shadows of the hallway. To his associates, this was a security protocol. To Min-jae, it was a hunt. He sat back and opened the first live feed on his laptop, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He would watch her every move, wait for the inevitable slip-up, and when she finally revealed her true nature, he would be there to ensure she never had the chance to betray another soul again. The digital dragnet was cast. By midnight, Min-jae sat alone in the blue-tinged glow of his private sanctuary, surrounded by a dozen screens capturing every angle of the mother's wing. The surveillance was comprehensive, featuring pinhole lenses hidden behind picture frames and microphones sensitive enough to catch the catch of a breath. He watched with the predatory patience of a man waiting for a trap to spring, his eyes fixed on the feed from Sada's quarters, expecting to see her unearth the eternal crane or whisper into a burner phone to her accomplices. Instead, the screens revealed a different kind of intensity. While the rest of the mansion slept, Saad did not. At 2 a.m., a sharp, panicked cry echoed through the speakers. Mrs. Seo Yun-ok was caught in the throes of a night terror, her mind a fractured landscape of ghosts and forgotten names. On the monitor, Min-jae saw Saad bolt upright, not with the irritation of an employee being disturbed, but with the immediate, visceral response of a protector. He leaned forward, his fingers tensed on the desk, waiting for her to lose her temper or provide the sedative he assumed she used to keep his mother quiet. But Saad didn't reach for a needle. She reached for the woman's trembling hands. The audio feed picked up a low, rhythmic humming, a song Min-jae didn't recognize, melodic and soul-deep, cutting through the jagged edges of his mother's screams. "You are safe, Mama," Saad whispered in a voice so thick with genuine empathy it made Min-jae's chest tighten. For 3 hours, the surveillance footage played out like a silent prayer. Saad stayed on the floor by the bed, her back against the hard wood, refusing to leave even as her own eyes grew heavy with exhaustion. She spoke to the elderly woman about the color of the sunrise and the smell of rain, weaving a tapestry of words to anchor the mother's drifting mind. Min-jae watched, mesmerized and increasingly unsettled. He had looked for evidence of a crime. Instead, he was witnessing a sacrifice. There was no stolen jewelry in her hands, only the fragile fingers of a woman who had forgotten her own son, but who was now falling asleep to the heartbeat of a stranger. The cold logic of his world began to fray at the edges. He had built an empire on the belief that everyone had a price, but as the first light of dawn hit the monitors, he realized he was looking at something his money hadn't bought, and something his suspicion was starting to feel unworthy of. The days that followed were a masterclass in quiet devotion, captured in the clinical blue light of Min-jae's surveillance screens. He watched, transfixed, as Saad turned her small bedroom into a makeshift classroom during the few hours Mrs. Seo slept. By the glow of a laptop, she practiced the subtle intonations of the Korean language, her lips moving silently as she mimicked a language learning app. She wasn't just learning to communicate. She was learning to bridge the chasm of his mother's isolation. Min-jae, who had always communicated through commands and cold efficiency, found himself frozen as he watched her take meticulous notes on traditional Korean poetry and folk songs. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon when the shadows in the mother's wing felt particularly long. Mrs. Seo was agitated, her hands plucking at her traditional silk robes as she looked around the room with the eyes of a trapped animal. Min-jae reached for the intercom, ready to summon a doctor, but he stopped when Saad approached. She didn't use the sharp, clinical tone of the previous caregivers. Instead, she lowered herself to the floor, making herself small and non-threatening. "Iamoni," Saad whispered, the Korean word for mother falling from her lips with a soft, practiced reverence. The effect was instantaneous. Mrs. Seo's frantic movements ceased. Saad began to sing a traditional lullaby, her voice a warm melody that seemed to weave through the room like a physical embrace. It was a song Min-jae vaguely remembered from his own childhood, a song his father had dismissed as sentimental weakness. As Saad sang, she incorporated the few Korean phrases she had mastered, telling his mother she was safe, she was loved, and she was home. Through the high-definition speakers, Min-jae heard his mother let out a long, shuddering breath. For the first time in months, the fog of dementia seemed to lift, replaced by a momentary, crystalline peace. She reached out and touched Saada's cheek, a gesture of recognition that Min-jae hadn't received in years. Sitting in his office, surrounded by the cold machinery of his empire, Min-jae felt a pang of something sharper than suspicion. He had spent a fortune on the best medical equipment and the most expensive specialists, but he had never thought to learn the language of his mother's heart. He watched Saad smile, a genuine, tired smile, as she continued to sing. He had installed these cameras to find a thief, but every minute of footage was instead documenting his own failure as a son. The outsider was doing more than just caregiving. She was reclaiming a soul he had long ago surrendered to the shadows.